It is the biggest public works project ever in Kenya, a $3.8 billion bet on the country's economic future. Sealed on a deal with China to help build a sprawling rail network in East Africa. They call it the Madaraka Express, after Kenyan Independence Day. And in its first year of operation, it has given Kenyans new freedom and optimism. A 10-hour drive time between the coastal city of Mombasa and the capital, Nairobi, slashed by half or more.
Really, there are not so many complaints comparing to the transport system that we're used to.
Shipping costs slashed by half too, a shot in the arm for business and, hopefully, new jobs. The train, more widely called the SGR, for Standard Gauge Railway, is a critical link in something far bigger. China's massive Belt and Road Initiative, a $1 trillion plan to finance and build railroads, ports, roads, and other huge projects in nearly 70 countries. China casts Belt and Road as a friendly effort to help emerging economies like Kenya's. But the deals are boon for China, too. Chinese state banks lend the money. Then, Chinese companies cash in on construction deals.
So these infrastructure projects are not altruistic aid projects. What the Chinese get out of it, or what Chinese companies get out of it, are lucrative infrastructure contracts where not only Chinese construction firms win these contracts, but they also pull along a number of smaller suppliers and other Chinese companies that also get to participate.
Belt and Road projects are certifying China's ascent to the top trade partner for African states.
If anything, it's an acceleration of existing trends that we've already seen for the past decade or more, where China has already overtaken the US in terms of being the primary economic partner for African countries and for the continent as a whole. Africa does not take the same priority in US foreign policy as perhaps it used to, and it doesn't occupy the same sort of attention. Whereas for China, the relationship has become, over a decade or more, very politically institutionalized.
And African countries are getting a payoff. An extensive survey by McKinsey Consulting found that thousands of Chinese-owned firms, some big, some small, are hiring, training, and promoting tens of thousands of African workers.
It's a win-win for me. If we don't have the standard gauge railway, if we don't have, we're going to be losing as an economy. The government, if they become lenient, we go back to our 80s and 90s. We will never grow as an economy.
Kemboi's story is one the Kenya government wants to reproduce. She landed a good-paying job after graduating from the Railways Training School.
Well, with the SGR training, I think we have trained close to 1,000 graduates who are currently running the standard gauge railway. Our graduates who will be handling the cabin crew, the maintenance, the passenger operations, all the people that will help in the running of the trains have actually passed through this institution.
Kenya hired Chinese state-owned companies to build the railroad, then operate and maintain it for up to 10 years, when enough Kenyans will be trained to take over.
如果是在国内的话，就是3-5年吧，就说3年是副司机，5年才能成为司机。他现在才学习了还不到1年呢，这个状态下，他们现在是见习副司机。
Another success story, Edgar Sirucha, a Mandarin-speaking civil engineer. He was hired by China Railway Construction Corporation to work on roads.
I studied in China for my bachelor and master degree, and it was in engineering. And to see a country that has been so developed, I carried the dream here, and I hope that one day I'll see a Kenya that is just as developed or even further developed than China.
But the SGR has also become hugely controversial. Most recently, the arrests of Kenya Railways Managing Director and the country's Land Commission Chief, accused with others of fraudulent SGR property deals. and their complaints that the Chinese kept the best-paying jobs for themselves, mistreated Kenyans in lower-skilled positions, even segregated them in cafeterias. Kenya Railways and lawmakers are investigating the treatment of workers. The officials accused of land fraud pleaded not guilty. For his part, Sirucha said tensions sometimes do surface on the job, but they can be overcome.
Coming here, of course, there are challenges where I've got people who complain the pay is low, I've got people who complain the hours are long, I've got people who complain the Chinese don't treat them right. Everyone has a reason to complain. But if you have a vision, you have a driving force that makes those problems be actually stepping stones.
Kenya's economy has been growing, but not as fast as neighboring Ethiopia, where the Chinese also financed and built a railway. The government is counting on the SGR to deliver. Already the line is being extended to connect with proposed industrial parks and eventually reach into Uganda. James Macharia is Minister of Transport, Infrastructure, Housing and Urban Development.
Well, as you know, the plan is to make sure that SGR contributes about 2.5% of GDP. You've seen the impact of the transport from Mombasa to Nairobi, both for passenger and for freight. And so by the time we finish the SGR up to Malaba, it will be adding another 2.5% of the country's GDP.
Other Kenya Railway and government officials declined VOA's interview requests. So did the SGR's builder, China Road and Bridge Corporation, and the Chinese embassy. In Mombasa, officials say cargo traffic is growing thanks to the SGR's lower costs. Until recently, Catherine Mturi Wairi was managing director at the Kenya Ports Authority.
We are looking at $250 for a 20-foot container and $300 for a 40-foot container. And compared to trucks, you're looking at between $700 for a 20-footer and $800. So it's definitely cheaper to go by rail.
But what's good for the SGR isn't good for long-haul truckers. They say the train has already cut into their businesses.
والله البزنس أول كان الشغل تمام يعني السيارة تروح من هنا إلى كامبالا يوم تنزل الكونتينر ترجع تو تحصل الشغل بس يوم صبر هذا الSGR شغل تعب مرة والله الفيوتشر بيكون صعب والله.
Officials say that in the end, truckers will benefit as container traffic increases at points inland.
The railway can only take up to 40% of cargo. So you will find that whatever is taken up by the railway line ultimately has to be trucked to some place.
The SGR's economics depend on more than cargo and passengers. To build the railway's first leg, Kenya borrowed almost all the $3.8 billion cost from the Chinese. Same for the next section, now under construction. Another $1.5 billion. The debt makes China far and away Kenya's biggest lender. Repayment was forgiven for 5 years, but in 2019, loan obligations to the Chinese will rise more than fivefold. Critics fear the debt will make the SGR a long-term loser, a victim to China's debt trap diplomacy. Akshay Vishwanath is an environmental activist who studied SGR finances.
Any business, any country, any economy uses debt to grow. But the magnitude of that debt, the ability to repay, the magnitude of those loans in comparison to the gross domestic product, all does matter. And I don't think that level of analysis has been conducted for these projects. And therefore, I say we need to worry.
SGR passengers already are paying 70% more for tickets than when the train launched a year ago. One of the SGR's fiercest opponents is Okia Omtata Okoiti. He has filed lawsuits alleging Kenya failed to do sufficient economic or environmental studies. Instead, he said the government bowed to the Chinese.
With the Chinese, everything is negotiated in China. The money is paid in China, like the SGR money is supposed to have been paid in China. What is brought to Kenya is the debt.
Omtata said China should be working to lessen financial risk for African states that take part in the Belt and Road Initiative.
So that you can have a developed China and a developed Africa. But you're going to end up with an undeveloped Africa and a collapsed states in Africa with a thriving China, which is the main problem we have.
Across Africa, the needs are great. The Africa Development Bank said countries face an annual infrastructure funding gap of some $70 to $108 billion. China has pledged $60 billion in financing for Belt and Road projects in Africa.
So there's some justified skepticism on the part of the World Bank and other international financiers on the economic viability of some of these new railways. Estimates for the economic viability of the Kenyan railway really depends on whether or not the targets for freight can be met. This, in a large part, will depend on how well the Chinese and Kenyans can cooperate in localizing skills and knowledge to operate and maintain this railway in order to make it sustainable.
It's too early to say whether the Madaraka Express will be an engine of progress for all Kenyans. But there's no doubt it's already a win for the Chinese.